So I'll just give a quick word based upon a dream that I had about 6 months ago, a prophetic dream that God gave me about my church, and I'll tie it in with the word I'm going to bring. Does anybody remember the last time I was here? It was 11 months ago at your house, and that's when I gave a word, and I will tie it into that word I gave, which was called maintain your awareness of God, at the end of this message. So here's the dream that I had. So in the dream, a man of God called Bruce Allen, who's a powerful man of God, he's well known, and he's been on a lot of shows like Sid Roth Show and so forth, things like that. It's been translated at least 2 or 3 times, I think. And he appeared in the dream, and he had these prophetic sunglasses in his hands, big black sunglasses, and he was looking at who to put them on. And whoever he put them on was going to prophesy over the church that I go to, called Strong Tower. So he got 2 women in front of him, one on his left and one on his right. And it looked like he was going to maybe put the glasses on the woman on the left at first. But he looked closely at her, and then he chose the woman on the right instead. And he put them on her. And then she came over to Strong Tower where we were sat. And the first thing she said to us, now that she was wearing these prophetic sunglasses with which she could prophesy, she said, "Don't think that you're not enough." Because the church that I go to, it's a very small fellowship. There's only a handful of us that go, and it's been small for years. It's only been going a few years, but it's just a few of us that go. So that was like a word of encouragement to begin with. But then she said the words, and she said it very sternly, whilst looking sternly at us. She said, "Prayer bowl." And I knew in the dream that she meant that the church was to be a prayer bowl, that our prayers were going to register with God, as if you pour water in a bowl. And it's a very biblical term, isn't it, bowl? We see that term in the Bible, don't we? In Revelation as well. And that's the little teaching I'm going to give tonight, is every need. Well, before I do that, do a bit of dream interpretation. Why did Bruce Allen put sunglasses on, prophetic sunglasses? Why was it the sunglasses that enabled the woman to prophesy symbolically, do you think?
She was so God.
I never even thought of that. That's an added dimension. That's good, but that's not the one I was going to bring out. But why do you think sunglasses? And why the woman on the right, not the woman on the left? And why was it a woman? Why not a man? Why was it not 2 men or 1 man and 1 woman? It was 2 women he was going to choose between. So what do you think?
Wisdom.
Why would that be represented? Because it's feminine, the wisdom.
In the Bible, yeah. Wisdom.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
You're close in a way.
Right, just one.
So the right one, obviously, the one on the left by definition is not right. So she wasn't the right woman to put them on, and the one woman on the right was the right woman. What I saw in the dream, and you would have to have been the dreamer to see this, was that the one on the left, they were both Christians, but it was very subtle. But the one on the left just had some presumptuous pride in her. It was very subtle, though. She wasn't evil or anything. They were both Christians, but the one on the left, I just sensed like a bit, almost like an entitlement, like taking things for granted, like a presumptuousness in it. But it was only very subtle. It wasn't major. But the woman on the right, I perceived in her none of that. But I perceived in her like a zeal, but it was a humble zeal. Now, zeal is very easy to come by, isn't it? There's a lot of people zealous, isn't there?
Mm.
Even in the Christian world, there's a lot of Christians who are zealous. But how many Christians are truly humble? Humility is like gold, isn't it? It's not easy to come by, but when you get it, it's precious. It will be precious because it will exalt you. Because he that humbles himself will be exalted. He that exalts himself will be humble. So I saw in her not only a zeal, but a humble zeal. And that's why he put the sunglasses on her. And the reason why there were sunglasses is because sunglasses dull the light, don't they? So maybe you'd think, well, we want the light to be bright. God is light. You want the light to be brighter, don't you? It's like a strange way, but what it meant was sunglasses only dull natural light, don't they? The light of the sun, but that's just natural light. So what God was saying was that the things of the natural world have to be dull in your sight so that the spiritual can be brighter. So that enabled her to prophesy accurately, because the things of this world, and by the things of this world, I don't necessarily mean things that are overtly sinful. I mean things that we have to do, like driving your car, bills, a house, a job, things like this that are not sin, but still God wants us to have natural things as dull in our sight. Like that song says, turn your eyes upon Jesus, and the things of this earth. Sorry, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face. Correct.
Yeah.
So you've been saved a long time, I see, because I grew up with songs like that in the 80s. So it says, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of the earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. And we're always oscillating in between that. It's a seesaw, because as the natural things go down, the spiritual will go up. But as the spiritual goes down, the natural, you'll be more obsessed with the natural. And the Bible says the spirit lusteth against the flesh lusteth against the spirit. These two are contrary to one another, so that you do not do as you wish. In other words, just resign yourself to the fact that it's a battle. Resign yourself to the fact that you're in your own Garden of Eden, and in the midst, not on the periphery. It says the two trees that were in the midst of the garden, that means in the middle. It was just the tree of life or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The other trees were on the periphery, but because they're the central themes of life, they were right next to each other. So what that meant was, if you were tempted and you're going over to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to sin, the tree of life is just a stone's throw away. It's right there in your periphery to convict you. And as you're going over to this tree of life to eat from God, yeah, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is just a stone's throw away in your periphery to tempt you. So it's a dichotomy, it's a fork in the road, and it's only distills down into two choices, because Jesus said, he that is not for me is against me, he that gathereth not scattereth. So are you a person of the tree of life, or are you a person of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Which is another way of saying, are you a person of conviction, or are you a person of temptation? And so that's why she had prophetic sunglasses on. And so now about the prayer bowl, and about the fact that it was two women. Well, the bride of Christ is the bride. It's feminine, isn't it? So this represented two different types of believer, two different types of church, if you will. The one that was not quite right, she was on the left. She was still a Christian, she was still saved, but her character was not ready for them prophetic sunglasses. And he had to study her closely to see that. He was almost going to put them on her to begin with, but then he changed his mind and put them on the woman on the right. So that's two different types of Christian. So then, okay, a prayer bowl. So when we think of prayer, sometimes we tend to think of it as just some sort of etheric, you're praying and the prayers are just going into like the mist, and hopefully maybe God hears. Well, we know he hears, but don't think of it as something that's like the goalposts are moving, because if the goalposts are moving all the time, can you play a game of football? No. You wouldn't even try, would you? It would just defeats the whole object of the game. Those goalposts have to stay still. The players can move around as much as they want to, but if the goalposts start moving, now the game is absurd, isn't it? So when you think about prayer, don't think of it as just some random thing. Think of every prayer need, whether you're praying for the salvation of a loved one, or a healing of a body, or a blessing, a bigger house, or whatever you're praying for. Think of it as a bowl, because that's what it truly is in the spirit realm, which means it has a limitation. In other words, once you fill that bowl high enough, it will overspill. It's not just something that's random. It's not random. There's a physicality to it. The laws of the spirit realm are determined by spiritual laws of physics, just like the physical realm is determined by physical laws of physics. So when that prophetess in the dream said prayer bowl, she was saying, this is what she was saying, make sure that you put into that prayer bowl with passion, with consistency, because it will overspill. But here's the thing, you don't get to decide how big the bowl is for any of the needs. God decides that, because a human soul is as precious as a human soul is precious. You can't say, well, Lord, I only want to pray for 10 minutes for this, so can you give me a 10-minute bowl? No, if the bowl is 5 hours to accomplish whatever need that is, that he's not going to change the goalposts. It's going to be a 5 hour. You might give up, but the prayer bowl isn't going to change. So we don't get to decide how big the prayer bowl is, but we do get to decide whether we're going to give up or not. So if you imagine, if you're praying for a loved one, let's say, and let's say that's a bowl this size, let's say, and you're only pouring it in teaspoon by teaspoon. It's going to take a lot, isn't it, to get that person to Christ, or at least bring them to the best chance they have of salvation. It still depends on their free will, of course, but for you to give them the best chance so that they can have the best revelation, so you make it as easy as possible for them, in other words. So we don't get to decide how big the bowl is, but we do get to decide whether we give up or not. So if a prayer bowl for one person's salvation is this big, what's the prayer bowl for a family, an entire family to get saved, going to be? Going to be bigger, isn't it? Because there's more souls. So it's going to need more prayer. What's the prayer bowl like for an entire town? Let's say you have a passion to win your town for Christ. Now the prayer bowl may be so big that many people are going to have to be involved in this now.
Generations.
Yeah. Or what if the prayer bowl was for an entire nation? Right. Well, this is it, and it's a revelatory thing that once the bowls are filled, that's when he pours them out. So, do you remember the Hebridean Revival, 1949 to 1952? So I read a book on it called Sound of Heaven, and it was an intense revival in the Isle of Lewis, and thousands of people were involved in this. They were on the islands, but if I remember rightly, it was just 2 old women that were praying with great consistency, I think. And so you're going to think, well, and the tremendous revival broke out on that island. In that place, there was fishermen that weren't even Christians, probably atheists, just hard drinking, cursing fishermen and miners or whatever. And they were banging on the church doors saying, tell us how to get saved. And they were falling on their knees even before they got to shore, when they were on the seas, because the presence of God was convicting them that strongly. Now, to get to that, do you think that prayer bowl is just going to be a couple of hours? No, it's not going to be a couple of hours, is it? To get that intensity where it just breaks, because people said that when they drove into the postcode, you could feel yourself driving into the presence of God. It was that strong. And when you drove out, you could feel yourself driving out of the presence of God. So to get that kind of a break, a shift, for the angels to be able to dismantle those demonic powers that were holding all those men in spiritual chains, it would have taken a lot. It would be a very big ball, wouldn't it? So how did 2 people manage to do that, do you think? So that's another factor, isn't it? Because yes, there's 2 people is only a very small amount of people, but another factor we've got to add to the equation is how long they pray for. Because would you rather have just 2 people praying for 20 years? And if I remember rightly, don't quote me on it, but I think it was about 20 years they were praying. It was certainly years. Don't quote me on the number, but it was years. It wasn't just a few weeks. They were praying for years. I think one of them was blind, maybe the other one had bad knees. I don't think they did anything but just pray all day. God put that in them to do that. And so what would you rather have? Would you rather have, a prayer meeting with maybe 20 or 30 people showing up at a church, just praying casually for an hour with the mind wondering about what they're going to have for tea afterwards? Or would you rather have 2 old women who do nothing but pray for many, many years? So either way you work it, whether it's by a small amount of people praying for a huge amount of time, or a lot of people praying for a small amount of time, it balances out, doesn't it? Because what 2 people could achieve praying for 20 years, maybe 100 people could achieve praying for far less years, couldn't they? The mathematics will work out, won't it? Things do register. You remember when Jesus said, fear not, Paul, for I have many people, you're not going to be hurt, for I have many people in this city. He actually mentioned an amount, didn't he? Because they were shaping that spiritual atmosphere, at least somewhat, so he was protected there. So we don't get to decide how big the bowl is, but we do get to decide whether we keep on praying or not. And it will only get the registry of that answer once the bowls spill. God's very keen on the fullness being attained, whether it's bowls of compassion or bowls of wrath. You remember that one point in the Old Testament where God said, I'm not going to do a certain thing yet, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Do you remember that scripture? So it's an interesting way of saying that, could God have done it before? Yes, he could, but he does things like, in order, like if on your job, if there's a lot of dust everywhere, but there's still going to be more dust yet, you don't sweep up halfway through the day, do you? You do it all at the end, don't you? When there's no point in, there's times like that where God would rather them not sin, of course, but if he knows they're just going to keep on sinning, he's going to judge them all in one job lot, isn't he? And he was going to do that. So the bowls can be poured out for wrath, but the bowls can be poured out for mercy as well. One testament that I heard a few months back is from a woman of God, a prophetic woman of God, was that her sister she had a deadly disease, and she was riddled with this disease, and she was in the hospital dying, basically. So this woman of God, she said that she got these Koreans, she was ministering in Korea, so she got these Koreans to pray for her sister, because the Koreans really pray hard, really hard and sincere. And she said, I knew that she would be in good prayer hands with these, so they really prayed really hard for her sister. And she went visiting in the hospital room, and she was right close to death. And then Jesus appeared in the hospital room, and he said, the bowls of prayer for your sister are now full, and I can pour it one way or the other. He said, if I pour it one way, she will be completely healed from head to toe right now, and she's going to join you in your ministry and live on the earth. If I pour it the other way, I'll give her a heavenly body now, and she's going to come to heaven with me. And the decision was on this woman of God's sister. It was Barbie Breathitt's sister. It was the woman, and she decided to have it. She decided to go to heaven, and she died there and then. Now, what that tells us is, like I was saying, that the prayer bowl, don't think of it when you're praying as just some random thing, as how much is it great? Is it just like disappearing like cigarette smoke and then it's gone? No, every prayer you pray, it goes into that bowl. But the question is, are you going to pray enough to reach the tipping point? Because you've got to know by faith. If you could see the bowl, this is another factor we have to add into the equation. You don't see the bowl, do you? So how do you know? You might be 9/10 of the way from the top of that bowl. You could be just about to overspill and get your manifestation, the salvation of a loved one, or that blessing you want for yourself, or a healing of someone's body. You could be just about tipping point, but you decide at the last minute that I'm too tired now, I don't want to pray, or I want to scroll through my phone instead. Now, wouldn't that be a tragedy if you were so close to the answer, but you don't see the bowl? So what would you do then? If you don't see the bowl and you can't tell whether you're 9/10 full or 1/10 full, what do you do?
Keep going.
You just keep going, don't you? So, but you would only keep going if it really means something to you, wouldn't it? If it's something that isn't as vital to you, you're not going to pour into that prayer bowl, are you? Or you're not going to pour into it with as much passion. But if it's something that is of all importance to you, then you're not going to take no for an answer, are you? Even though you can't see the prayer bowl, and even though you may be tired already and you've prayed a lot already, and you're thinking, I'm a 3/10 of the way, I'm a 1/10, I'm a 9/10, and you don't see how much of that prayer bowl you've filled. If it means something to you, you'll just keep praying, won't you? You won't take no for an answer. So the last point I'll make, and I'll finish on this, is that, and this is the message that I gave nearly a year ago, was that, and this is the last factor I'm going to put into the prayer bowl, is it's not just how many people pray, it's not just for how long you pray. The other factor is, and think of this Bible verse, the effective fervent prayer of a availeth much. So if the effective, if just any prayers availed much, that's a redundant statement, isn't it? But he says the effective fervent prayer, fervent means white hot, prayer of a righteous man availeth much. So the other factor that we've got to add in is not just how many people are praying, or even for how long they're praying, but how righteous the prayers are. Correct?
Yep.
So that would be the effect. If the prayers are really righteous, instead of pouring it in with a teaspoon, let's say they're pouring it in with something far bigger.
Fire hose.
A fire hose. Well, you'd have to be like Enoch, or maybe like the Apostle John, to be like a fire hose. But that's possible, isn't it? So that's the other factor, is how righteous the prayers are. So we have several factors, don't we? The amount of time you're willing to put in, the amount of people that are praying, these things are all very important, but the righteousness level of the prayers is also extreme. These are all ingredients in baking the cake, aren't they? And you need all those ingredients. And so this is the final point I'll bring, and then I'll finish on this. To attain that level of righteousness, we need to have a resonance of prayer that I always call it like this, a state of prayer. Not you praying for something, but you simply saying to God, God, I just want to be aware of you all the time. Not even asking him for something, even if the thing that you're asking for is righteous, even if you're asking for the salvation of a loved one, or you're asking for something that's spiritual in nature, what God wants, even beyond that, because you're not always going to be praying for loved ones. When we're in heaven, we're not going to be praying for anyone's salvation. When we're in heaven, we're not going to be praying for anyone's healing or anyone's exorcism or anything like that. So they're not eternal, are they? But the thing that is eternal is you being aware of God. That kind of prayer, that's going to be, even in heaven, there's going to be that kind of prayer. So if you picture, and this is what I finished on, I was going to finish on now, is what I spoke about last time, is that imagine your prayer life, not as just you praying for things, that's a part of prayer, but the actual nature of prayer itself is like a continual resonance. You know, like if you hit a tuning fork and it just resonates continually. Imagine your prayer life being your awareness of God. Whether or not you're asking him for something is another matter. But you try to have an awareness of him, just like you're aware of me right now because you're looking at me, aren't you? You're aware that I'm in the room. Well, try to be aware that God's in the room at all times, whether you're doing the dishes, whether you're driving down the road, whether you're listening to me right now. Be aware of him all the time. And that spiritual awareness, you choosing to do that, and it will always be a choice. It doesn't happen naturally. What will happen naturally in your life, if you just left to your own devices naturally, what even Christians tend to do is just dissipate the time, whether scrolling through a phone too much, or just watching things that's not edifying, or just silly conversations, or even things that aren't necessarily sin, but left to our own devices, the natural man will just be natural, won't it? It takes conscious, voluntary choosing to be aware. You have to. That's why in the Garden of Eden, they had to make a conscious choice whether they were going to eat the tree of life or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It came down to a conscious choice. It's always going to come down to that. So choose to be aware of him as much as you can. Have like a background radiation or a circular radiation of God at all times. Even while you're listening to me now, try to be aware of his presence as much as you can, and that will elevate your state of righteousness. I'm not talking about for salvation. I'm talking about to get your prayers answered, to really hit that sweet spot with God. The more aware you are of him, when you actually pray for something in particular, it carries more punch because all the day long you've been in a state of prayer. Do you get me? It makes sense, doesn't it? So out of that state of prayer, you pray for individual prayer needs, but the state of prayer must resonate always, always. So that's the prayer ball message. But if you can remember this one thing, just be aware of his presence as much as you can. Choose to be aware of it. Amen.